This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
A grim reality for minority students.
I teach them about a lot of levels of systemic oppression, from mass incarceration to racism within the educational system. I've had students come to me and talk about their experiences with police brutality.
Generations exposed to violence.
Sometimes it could be very dangerous, especially close by this area. There could be shootings at literally any moment.
And an education system that punishes low-income communities.
You can tell the difference when you walk into the building of a predominantly black school and a predominantly white school. The stuff that they teach them is always different. And sometimes I feel like they think that we're dumb.
How are they doing pre-calculus? I had to get tutoring to even learn the basics of algebra. And I realized all of those kids were all white kids.
Marginalized groups struggling with trauma.
It had happened outside the school. Seeing a student lost its life is really, really disappointing.
And up against systems that have historically discriminated against them.
The fact that you couldn't own a home in particular neighborhoods, if you were black or brown, meant that you couldn't accumulate wealth and you couldn't pass it down to your kids, and we are living with the effects of that.
The race gap in the U.S., African Americans. Next on Big Story.
Was heard after gun violence erupted near a school. This happened just after dismissal. The 14-year-old heard the shots but did not see the shooter.
My name is Jaheim Kelly. I'm 17 years old, and I go to Tilden Educational Campus, specifically Cultural Academy for the Arts and Sciences. Sometimes it could be very dangerous, especially close by this area. There could be shootings at literally any moment at any given time.
In this corner of Flatbush, Brooklyn, this windowless basement apartment means safety for Jaheim and his father, Ann Lee.
Sometimes in my room, I can hear it. I worry the instant the shot goes off. I just sit there and my heart beats, rapidly. And I just think about it, interrupt my thought process, how my brain works. It interrupts everything. I can't think properly, I can't study properly, I can't do nothing.
That's why I took him to school whenever I'm off. On my days off, I try to take him to school, because every day you watch the news, somebody's got shot. Just by minding their own business, just by going to the store, just by sitting in their vehicle. And they got to do something about the gun violence in this city, because it's getting out of control.
Jaheim's father works as a security guard in a mental health facility. He says he'd move from here if he could afford it.
In terms of violence, poverty, lack of opportunity, lack of resources. You understand? These are the areas that you see all of this happening. It doesn't happen in Manhattans and areas where schools are being funded properly. I don't want my son to go to school in an area where he's not safe, And it's not guaranteed that he could walk from the bus stop to his school safely because of what's happening around him, which is not his fault, but because of generation and generation of disparity that's been going on in our neighborhood and in our city and in our boroughs.
A 16-year-old girl in critical condition tonight. We've learned she attends Cobble Hill High School, and she was just hanging out with friends, sitting on a bench after school when she was shot. Meanwhile, that playground remains closed off by crime scene tape. Police continue the search for the shooters.
I hate taking the train, the subway, because of how dangerous it is. You can never expect what happens. Recently, there was a shooting. Thank God no one was killed. That stuff really scares me. I hate taking the subway. I'd rather take the bus anywhere I go.
The bus gets him safely to school. To enter, students must pass through metal detectors. Jaheim says that's something he'd like to see go.
Some laws, I guess, I would reduce some of the laws to make it feel less of like a prison sometimes. Sometimes we can't go to the bathroom in like the first or last period. And some kids have bladder problems or they can't really use the bathroom most of the time because it's strict.
Jaheim plays volleyball after school. It's one of his few moments of real freedom.
After school, I'll mainly just go straight home. Straight home, do nothing.
Because the school doesn't offer robust after-school programs, it can't afford them. Ann Lee, Jaheim's father, wanted to send him to an elite specialized school.
Brooklyn Tech. One of those schools is most likely Asians, white Americans. Those are schools that's been well funded, put it that way, where kids got a lot more opportunity to excel. So that's just one of the schools I wanted to enroll them in.
Given what Jaheim's been dealt, he's doing well in school. But he's got lots of friends who aren't. This is his classmate, Troy. He's struggling just to graduate.
I feel like I need a break from high school. It's just really stressed altogether. I need a break. Everything, basically. I feel like the way they pour out all this knowledge in my head, I can't learn that fast. I am a very slow individual. I will listen, and if it gets to the point where like they're taking too long to explain, I just stop functioning halfway and just like daydream. I have this blank face on my face when they're just like blank face, basically. I feel like every time I'm walking like in day and in night, I have to check behind me every 24/7. Just out of safety, and feel like anxiety and stuff. But besides that, nothing really happens. I just reach home safe and it's just my head like spinning, overthinking and stuff.
This at 17. These boys lived trapped lives, moving between an underfunded school that feels more like a jail to their homes and back again.
So that you don't hit the basketball board yet. Now listen, when you throw, step on the black line, I give you a guideline. And aim. Aim, follow through. Got it. Aim, and follow through. Excellent, beautiful. Same thing, excellent. Why is fitness great, and what was your best experience at IS 339? Why do you love the school so much?
I love the school so much because it helps you to get fit. And it also teaches you different sports that you can play. And they show you a sport that might interest you so that you can follow that sport later on. I love the community at IS 339 because they give you support that you need. And anytime you're having trouble with something or you don't know something, they're always there to help you.
We have a lot of different sports here. Maimuna and I, last year we used to play basketball and we were able to join the team. I liked it a lot because I was able to try out for a new team, a new sport, which was first difficult, but then it was good. All teachers, they are good teachers. If you need help with something, they help you, they take their time if each student needs help.
This is Public Middle School 875 in the Bronx. The future. For 13-year-old kids in New York City, it's always hard to predict. There are so many choices for schooling. The city has 520 public high schools, plus dozens of private schools. Then there are charter schools, which are public but get outside funding, and the tech schools. Then you have the elite specialized schools, also public with their tough entrance exams. But getting into the school of your choice can be a nightmare, if not impossible. New York City has one of the country's most segregated public school systems. The vast gap between rich and poor and often different races is reflected in classrooms from the most neglected to the best funded.
Oh my God, you're missing out.
But of course, most, if not all, kids have ambitions, some big ones.
My name is Maimuna, and my favorite subject is math. I'm trying to become a cardiothoracic surgeon in order to save lives, and I'm trying to make a cure for cancer.
My name is Roxanne Vanderhorst. I am 15 years old. My birthday is April 7. My favorite color is red. My mom is Dominican, so I speak Spanish. I would like to become a peds surgeon or general. Peds mostly has to do specifically with kids. I have a great interest with kids, and I love kids. After high school, I would try to get into Harvard or a good advanced college that has a medical program. I'll try to go to med school and prove everybody wrong.
Wrong for assuming that kids like her will fall through the cracks. She's a minority from a single-parent home, growing up in an over-policed, under-resourced corner of the Bronx. Like many, she sees the specialized schools as a way to reach her goals.
I have been here for 3 years. This year, when we started doing our high school applications, our guidance counselor for the high school applications told us that there are also specialized high schools. I have heard about specialized high schools before because when I was in 5th grade elementary, they sent me an open house for a specialized high school, but the specialized high school that I did the test for was the Bronx High School of Science. The test was difficult, but I was able to finish it in the time that we had.
The specialized high school exam was a test so that students in middle school can apply for high schools that's more advanced for them. So basically, we took the classes online because, COVID and quarantine. So when we took the classes online, they gave us ELA questions and math questions to answer. So we answered them, and then one day we came into the school, we took the test. It was really hard for me.
A lot has been made of New York City's specialized schools. They're top-notch, been around for decades, and produce a steady stream of leaders in the arts, sciences, and government. Each year, some 20,000 students take the entrance exam. There are just 600 openings. If you get in, you have access to great teachers, materials, and guidance not on whether to go to college, but to which one. Depending on whom you talk to, the schools are symbols of hope and excellence, or of a system rigged against minorities and the poor.
But specialized high school exam is to get into specialized high schools in New York City. And the one that most kids in this building try to go for is the one in Bronx High School of Science. The idea is that kids, when they get into that school, it allows them to get into better schools.
That one specialized school test. Math teacher Mike Vasquez has spent his career helping his mostly Black and Latino middle school students to pass it.
In the years that I've been here, 20 years, only 4 kids have made it to specialized high school. 4 in the 20 years in this school. Other schools have been more successful, but we have not been as successful. Again, part of it is because we start out late. That could be part of the problem. The other problem is we didn't have, like I said, a curriculum. There are programs out there where kids can start at 6th grade, 7th grade, and then will more or less be guaranteed a seat in specialized high school. But we haven't had that curriculum. I've requested it, but never got it. 70% of the kids in New York City are Hispanics or blacks. Only 9% will actually make it into the specialized high school. It's very low percentage that we actually get over the minorities.
9%. That's around 50 Black or Latino kids each year. That's down from around 25% a generation ago.
The educational system is essential to a well-functioning democracy, to our ability to succeed economically, to our ability to get anywhere close to the kind of equity that our founding principles promise. It's not the only answer, but it's a big, big part of the answer. So addressing disparities in educational outcomes, making sure we're looking at equity and quality is absolutely vital. But it's also true that it's one of several things that we need to fix if we're going to get where we need to be.
Just moments ago, police released body camera video. It shows what led up to the confrontation in the 116th Street station and ended with an arrest.
My name is Jean Mesereau. I teach high school seniors. My students are Black and Latino. I usually start the year with a unit on mass incarceration. We start from that lens because it's more of like the macro structure, and then that opens up like the narrower conversations about police brutality and like moments that they might unfortunately find themselves in. I teach them about a lot of levels of systemic oppression, from mass incarceration to racism within the educational system. I've had students come to me and talk about their experiences with racism and police brutality. This has been the experience of a lot of Black and brown folks for years.
Look, we're not gonna do this, right?
I've been pulled over by cops, I guess mistaken identity, but I was harassed, illegally searched, threatened. I've had, cops pull guns on me. I've been stalked and harassed by cops for actually recording another situation where cops were harassing someone. When you experience police brutality, it's hard to process at first. I mean, you have moments where it's hard to even believe that it's real. But, again, it's like a reality check. And when I went through those experiences, it just made, I always knew police brutality was, a part of our society. But, when you experience it firsthand, it kind of just wakes you up to that reality. It's racism in education, healthcare, housing, basically every system and every institution that we have. I learned how to navigate and, fortunately come out of those situations without, any damage to like my life or my future. And for my own students and, children someday, I'm just gonna teach them how to navigate those situations and how to keep their composure, because that's important. This picture right here was a shot of a basketball hoop in an abandoned school in Newark, New Jersey. I used to teach in Newark, and the school system there, when I was there, lacked like a lot of resources. Schools weren't, the buildings that I taught in specifically weren't really maintained well. A lot of them are, even if they're still like running, are abandoned. Like a lot of the administration and even the educators there aren't really invested in the school. And because of that, a lot of the students, again, in my experience, weren't really invested in the schools. So this, I felt like, was symbolic of that. It's almost like symbolizes like an abandoned dream in a sense.
We're in this time in the United States where we are really taking another look at our own history and reckoning with the things that we fail to understand or chose not to see. And those things affect us very, very deeply. That's most vivid with respect to the African American community. We are taking a hard look at the ways in which the ugly history of slavery affects things that we are still living with, that Black people in America are still living with. And I'm convinced that it's more difficult to make progress when we don't understand our history.
Only a handful of Black and Latino students are getting into New York City's elite high schools compared with other ethnic groups. This is from a new report from the New York City Department of Education.
Entrance into the specialized schools has supposedly always been based on merit. You take a test, you either ace it or you don't. Teacher Mike Vasquez says the cards are stacked against poor minorities from the start. For example, for years, the school has offered a free course to help kids prepare for the test, but at only one location.
The problem is that most parents, when they get the envelope to prepare for the test, they toss it. The reason why is because they would have to take the kid every Saturday down to Stuyvesant, from the Bronx down to Stuyvesant. I imagine they would have to sit there and wait for the kids because these are middle school kids. And it would be done over the summer, as well as during the year. So what happens is that a lot of kids, like in our kids, the ones that are given that opportunity, they don't take it. Because of course the parents, they're single parents. They work on the weekends and during the week, and they work long hours. If they're single parents, they have to support the family.
The schools also host mandatory open houses, often with lines of up to 2 hours just to get in.
The system will always protect itself. So even when you're talking about, okay, well, we're gonna do these different things to help make sure that schools start to, have a different composition, the system will revert back and figure out ways like, okay, high schoolers can now pick to go to other schools, but their parents have to go to a certain amount of open houses, they have to take these tests. So what happens? Kids with the most resources are still getting into those schools. Instead of us saying, why can't we make all schools great?
The kids Dana Rockland works with, many of whom face challenges at home and in school, ask the same questions.
My name is Leah Rivera. I am 18 years old, and I currently go to Urban Dove Team Charter School.
Urban Dove is in Brooklyn. It was started to meet the needs of students from throughout the city struggling academically. It eventually found a home here, but for Leah, who's been in and out of homeless shelters, her struggle continues.
Originally, I'm from Long Island, so from that transition to here is very different. I transitioned to a new school called Urban Dove Team Charter. Nobody's encouraging me to do anything in that school, and it's very, very hard. The work is not as easy. There's no counselors in my school. It's really bad. My school is mostly people of color and Hispanic and Black. We are in a Jewish community, so they don't approve of that, and I don't feel like it's safer for us to be there because of that.
To start a charter school, you need a proposal, staff, and a home. Urban Dove found this one in a local Jewish center in Inwood, Brooklyn. But when neighbors found out, they were furious. Urban Dove officials called a meeting. Our kids have academic challenges, they said. They're not dangerous criminals. That message did not resonate.
Ratio 300% greater than that of conventional schools of adult to student, of staff to student, to ensure the safety of the school environment. So my question to you, Jay, is what ratio do you suggest for us to apply?
What are you going to do to ensure my security? Our children can play outside where they do now, and that they are not going to be afraid to be outside at 4:15 when they're getting out of school at 4:15.
All right, that's enough.
I've been trying to ask a question for over there.
No more, it's over.
All right, it's over, everybody.
The meeting ended in disarray. And then just a few months later, there was a shooting right outside the school.
family is in mourning today after a 17-year-old student was shot several times right outside of his school, Urban Dove Charter School in Midwood. We're learning today that he has died.
It had happened outside the school. That could have been prevented, but obviously it wasn't. We had walked out to school and we just heard shots going off and a student dropped. It had been one of our, I think our freshmen. Honestly, it's really sad. It's really traumatizing for everybody that was in the school. It's really, really dark right now. It's just seeing a student that we went to school with, we played sports with, on the floor, lost its life. It's really, really disappointing.
The shooting has reinforced local fears, making things even tougher on the students who are often scared themselves and need more support.
To my school now, what they did was just put a light, a police light. Still no security, still nothing. Our teachers said not to speak about it, leave it alone. It's really surprising that it wasn't spoken about. So everybody has to sit there with all this built up anger and depression and everything and just be told what to do all day. And I feel like it's easier for kids that have problems with other kids to go in that area because there's no school safety, there's only adults. It's like deans and stuff trying to be security guards and all that. It's not that safe for us.
Leah does have Rockland to talk to. She's now working as a community volunteer in Rockland's Build the Block program, raising awareness about the neglect in their neighborhoods and trying to get residents to vote. Here, she says, she feels appreciated and listened to.
I feel like me and other students in my school really want to be heard. And we really want to talk to somebody at the end of the day, because a lot of us don't have family at all.
No family, no sense of being wanted by anyone. Activists like Rockland say that's when the most vulnerable can get lost. Failing classes, getting suspended, getting into trouble, often with the law. She says it's all connected.
So 6 years ago, I started an organization called NYC Together, and our whole focus was making sure that kids did not enter the criminal justice system by focusing on young people who had school suspension and school disciplinary issues. And we would go to these schools, which were high suspension, low graduation rate schools, and say, hey, give us the kids that you say don't want to learn, and let us work with them instead of them getting suspended. Of course, we get this group of kids together and they're remarkable in every which way. And of course, we see that they're not the problem, but rather the system in which they've been placed into is the problem. And we were doing this work in partnership with the NYPD, trying to teach that social emotional literacy piece. And we had created protocols around what should happen if the police are called to schools, all in the hopes of reducing the chances of a young person entering the system and increasing the chance of a young person being academically successful.
Rockland says, time and time again, schools are too quick to write off minority kids. She recalls rushing to one school after a principal called 911 to break up a cafeteria fight between friends.
It was a nonsense fight. Luckily, I find out about this, we get to the school, we do a circle with the boys. Do you know these boys started crying? We're talking about teenage boys in Brownsville start crying in the circle because of how they hurt each other. But her initial response was police. They get a 911 call, they respond. So now they're coming into a school environment where a person of authority, who often looks like me, is telling them that there is this violent thing happening with people that are often portrayed as being violent, and they react. And the reaction is arrest.
Once the cuffs are off, she says, the child has entered into what's known as the school to prison pipeline.
We do in the United States expect the law enforcement system to catch a lot of the problems that we create through other failures. The failure of our educational system to provide a high quality education to every child in the United States, creates problems that we then, frankly, expect the police and the judicial system to clean up. And the police fix it using the tools that they have, and those are the wrong tools, and they are incredibly hurtful.
Police now have a 17-year-old in custody after a shot was fired inside a high school in the Bronx. No one was injured, and investigators did find a bullet hole in the floor of the classroom.
I was planning my escape from the South Bronx when I was 7 years old. At the beginning of the summer, the two buildings at either end of my block burned down, and at the end of the summer, my brother was killed in one of the drug wars. And I'd heard about Bronx High School of Science. And I was like, that's where the smart kids go. And I was like, every single thing I do, from reading books to going to school, to just filling my mind with anything, was one step closer to getting me into that school and then graduating and going to a name college. Like, that's what I call them, name school.
This is not a broken system. This is exactly the way this was supposed to be made. We don't actually have enough jobs to serve all of our graduates from high school and college. And we don't have enough systems of care to support vulnerable people. So we throw them into prisons, right? We over-police them. And so when we think about like what happens when you segregate a community, segregate a school, it's much easier to over-police schools that have been historically segregated. You can justify that these are dangerous communities. You can use all of the racist rhetoric that was used in the 50s to redline districts and say they're dangerous, the people don't care about their communities, they're dilapidated, without acknowledging the disinvestment, the over-policing, the under-resourcing, the strategic undervaluing of these communities. And then you basically justify funneling them into the carceral state.
Community revitalization strategist Majora Carter, who graduated 35 years ago from Bronx Science, went on to study and work far from her home in the Bronx.
Growing up, I was led to believe that there was no value in our communities. And it wasn't until I came back home after I was about to start graduate school, and I only came home because I needed a cheap place to stay. It's when I discovered that the city was planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront, where there were plenty of other noxious facilities. I had some education, and I did have some distance, and because of that, I was able to understand that it was because we were a poor community of color that was politically vulnerable, that's why they could concentrate these kind of abuses on us and feel like it was a perfectly okay thing to do. And that's when I was just like, this has nothing to do with us. This is literally the embodiment of the systemic racism and structural inequality that's put into places like this.
Carter says the same system drives minorities directly or indirectly toward jail. And then the entire society shoulders the cost. Keeping a kid in jail can cost up to 8 times more than keeping him in school.
And it's just against all of our best interests. And it's deeply, deeply rooted in the school segregation system that we have here, the punitive and carceral system that we have here, and ultimately white supremacy, right? Creating institutions that serve specific populations and marginalize and punish others.
Many would take issue with the white supremacy accusation, but the city's history, indeed the country's, is one of segregation.
Let no one be misled as to how I personally feel about mixing the races in the school. I'm unalterably opposed to it, and I intend to continue seeing that our state uses every lawful and proper means to prevent it.
Up until 1955, most public schools in the U.S. were segregated, either by official policy or circumstance. That year, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled segregation unconstitutional. But many school districts, including New York's, dragged their feet. 10 years after Brown versus the board, segregation in New York had actually gotten worse. On February 3, 1964, minority families finally protested. pulling their kids from class.
Now, anybody who wants to play sandlot baseball, you take the token integration that goes with it. You take the token freedom that goes with it. I want it all. I want it now, not tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And if it comes the day after tomorrow, I'm going to fight for it.
Nearly half of the city's million school kids stayed away that day.
De facto segregation at Lincoln School was officially ended. 70 other cities in 18 northern and western states still must solve the problem.
But holding up reforms were politically active, well-off whites, opposed to having their children bused to minority neighborhoods.
This is going to be an education problem and an economic problem. When you have such high unemployment amongst Negroes, 2 to 3 times that of white people, where you have young people who drop out of school in large numbers, hundreds of thousands, and cannot get employment, and people living in poor, substandard housing, lack an adequate education, then you're going to have many problems.
We have had laws and policies which have influenced where wealth accumulates and how it gets handed down, and excluded all kinds of people from being able to accumulate wealth. The fact that you couldn't own a home in particular neighborhoods, if you were black, for example, or brown, meant that you couldn't accumulate wealth and you couldn't pass it down to your kids, and we are living with the effects of that.
The worst decision of his young life. The suspect is 17 years old. He should have been focused on school and his future, but now he is facing murder charges, and his life will never be the same. 6 bullets were fired near South Bronx High School. Kids were walking home from school. 3 of them became innocent victims in that hail of bullets.
Segregation helps fuel that narrowing of choices, and it begins long before high school, right where the people live. Because public schools are financed by neighborhood property taxes, where property values are low, schools suffer.
We live in highly segregated neighborhoods. For example, a community like Brownsville, which has the highest per capita of public housing, all of those kids there, they look a certain way, they're all black, and they have similar household incomes, all that. And then they all go to school together.
Often to underfunded schools lacking the most basic materials.
The problem is most folks have just gotten used to it, and we don't actually even see how absurd it is that we have we have multi-million-dollar towers on the Upper West Side, literally across the street from housing projects, and we have 2 schools here, and one of them is catering and serving the tower, the other one is serving the students in the housing project, and then you're going to compare these kids, compare their test scores to each other, and then you're like, that school sucks because their test scores suck, right? But we've basically created a system where they're supposed to struggle, they're supposed to have a higher need, and we're supposed to compare them so that we can again continue this idea that they didn't work hard enough, so they deserve substandard opportunities. This idea that certain kids deserve something better than others is bullshit and racist and classist and elitist, right? Every single kid in this city in a public system should be given the best set of opportunities, in the world, in the city.
Historically, the city's segregation policies were wide-ranging, not just affecting schools. Keeping most minority families in separate neighborhoods also affected healthcare, jobs, and housing. Beginning in the 1930s during the Great Depression, banks began redlining Black neighborhoods in New York City and elsewhere. Their residents were deemed too risky for mortgages or even loans for maintaining buildings, including schools. For more than 3 decades, this race-based disinvestment blighted minority districts and left residents starved of services and resources. Property values plummeted. Though the practice was outlawed in 1968, discrimination continued. The damage has been lasting.
We designed this system of segregation. We made this is what we wanted, right? Not me, but we as a country. And so the whole, for me, this is really about maintaining a system of white supremacy and like racial capitalism. And the ways that we do that is by separating people from resources, opportunity, and power. And that is like the fabric of segregation, and it is written into our country.
The city's well-to-do, predominantly white neighborhoods are free from such constraints. Take Park Slope, Brooklyn. There, high school senior Jalen McCurdy interviews experts for her final thesis on how minorities intersect with the justice system. Personally, she's had her fair share of opportunities growing up here. Park Slope has well-funded schools, and Jalen's been top of her class since she was a kid. For Jalen, going to one of the elite specialized schools was the next natural step.
The guidance counselors at my school just kind of made it seem like, oh, you're a good student, so you kind of have the ability to get in wherever you want. I definitely feel like it's different in low-income neighborhoods where schools don't have as many resources, but I think in my middle school, they made it seem like everybody had the option to take tutoring if they wanted it, and they knew that like you would have to pay for tutoring. I just think that in certain schools, that's not something that crosses the administrator's mind, that a lot of students may not be able to afford the help or afford to be able to learn more about the high school process and which high school would be right for them.
Jalen's mom, Judith, a nurse, was able to cover the costs of the specialized prep courses.
If you don't have the resources, if you're not in the right area, if you don't have the right amount of money to get, your child into what they need to give them that little boost, that little push, then you're really at a disadvantage.
Including passing big exams.
The day of, I'm pretty sure I took it at Brooklyn Tech, so I was like, I'm gonna come in here. I'll be here next year for like when high school starts. I felt pretty prepared because I was doing all this studying, and I've never really taken such like a big standardized test before, because in my school we only had to take one Regents test, which is like another form of a standardized test that middle schoolers and high schools have to take.
Today, in fact, New York City public school students take their first standardized test at age 4 for the gifted programs. There are more tests in elementary school, then middle school, then high school. Jalen studied nights and weekends for her specialized exam.
I just think that I want to make my younger self proud. I want to make my mom proud of me, my dad, my sister, my whole family. I think that's all it really is. I care a lot about where my future goes because I just know that I've been blessed with so many opportunities that not a lot of other kids have. I was like prepared, but I felt nervous just going into it because you never really know how those things are going to go. Like you can think that you're doing so well when you're taking the test, and then you get the score back and you're like, that's not how I felt it went. So that's just basically kind of what happened. Like I thought I was doing well when I took it, and then I got the score back and I didn't have a high enough score to get into any of the specialized high schools, I believe. So that was kind of sad for me.
If a kid like Jalen, with faculty and family encouraging her and the means to pay for extra help, couldn't pass the specialized exam, imagine the kids in Mike Vasquez's math prep course up in the Bronx. They're not able to take prep courses, so they have just weeks, not years, to study.
Here's the math problems. When you look here, you can see they're all wordy. There's nothing that's straightforward. So you have to read the problem, and then understanding, if you're not used to reading these kind of problems, it's going to be very difficult for you. We didn't teach this in 8th grade. So clearly, in the past, the questions were geared more towards kids who had a private tutor or were involved in some kind of program where they were taught this. This is not something that an 8th grade student would just simply take. There's no way an 8th grade student back then could have taken a test like this and expect to pass it. Just no way.
Such was the style and substance of the specialized exam for which Vasquez was coaching Maymuna and Roxanne.
Thank you, Mr.
Hello.
Thank you. Bye, Mr. Bye, Mr.
And like Jalen McCurdy over in Park Slope, neither she nor Roxanne passed.
I asked one of my teachers, and they said the score that you needed in order to pass was at least 700. So my score was 326, so I needed about maybe 460 more points in order to pass.
We make our decisions together as people. And essential to that democracy is that we all be well enough educated to make good decisions. And we are making decisions that affect everybody. So it stands to reason that we need to understand ourselves as a country in order to function well as a democracy, and our educational system is central to that. So our ability to make good decisions really depends on our understanding the values of this democracy that we live in and having some capacity to uphold them. And I say that because I think all of that is in danger right now.
The shooting happened Wednesday afternoon just a few blocks away from Newburgh Free Academy. 4 teenagers were shot on a street yesterday afternoon. All of them are expected to survive their injuries, but the shootings forced the closure of a local high school.
It's a quiet spring morning in Flatbush, Brooklyn. But high school senior Alyssa Grant says it can get rough out here.
A lot of gunshots, a lot of fights, to the point like it got really close to the buildings. Like you can see the buildings like have gunshots inside of it. To like the summertime where everyone's outside, it's like crazier. So my mom was like really on us, like, oh, you gotta be inside this time. You know, I don't want anything to happen to you guys, because people just don't care. I mean, my friend talking about this other day, like gun bullets don't have a name on it. Anybody can get that bullet, and it could like ruin a family or a life, which is like honestly not fair to them.
For Alyssa and her foster sister, Takaria Thomas, life is lived mostly indoors, from home to school and back again. Alyssa's used to it, but Takaria's only been in Flatbush for a couple of years. She's unnerved by all the security, from cop cars permanently on the corner to metal detectors and uniformed guards at her public school, Tilden. She says they sometimes make her feel like a criminal.
Some of them could be rude in a way that just could ruin your whole day, honestly. And I feel like sometimes they feel like they can like step on us because we are kids and they're adults, and I just feel like that's not right.
Takaria says she used to get straight A's, but between COVID lockdowns, the security concerns, and the sense that she's punished for being Black, she's lost her motivation.
Sometimes I think about if you go to Manhattan and you know where it's predominantly more white students, they have more opportunities and things that we don't have in Brooklyn, where public schools are. And like you can tell the difference of when you walk into the building of a predominantly Black school and a predominantly white school. And I just feel like, you know, some things should just be a given. Like when you go to a school of predominantly white kids, the stuff that they teach them is always different. And sometimes I feel like they think that we're dumb.
Takaria's goals have shifted from scholarships to college to just graduating.
Sometimes because I feel like just because I live here and I go to a school like that in this area, I feel like they're looking down on me. It can take your motivation away. It can make you just want to drop out of school, which is why I feel like kids out here that be in gangs and stuff like that, it has something to do with issues when they go to school and they feel like, I don't even belong here. Like, you know, where I grew up, this, that, and the third, and they shouldn't have to feel that way just to go in the school building.
Takaria and Alyssa say their teachers do care about them, and their principal, as they tell it, she's a saint. But there are these larger issues of a community neglected on so many fronts, and of a school severely under-resourced. The girls' mom, Nadine Wilson, says she's about to throw in the towel, take them all to live in Texas.
One thing I've learned, even as a Christian woman, is you speak life in your children. You speak positivity in your kids. Don't ever look at it. I mean, I'm not going to, they could tell you, I'm accustomed sometimes to be lazy, but you have to not constantly do it. Speak life, speak positive things in their lives, and let them start thinking positive. Metal detectors, seriously? We're putting them in a life of prison. That's a prison system right there.
Wilson works with autism patients and needs to find a job before uprooting the family. In the meantime, she just mothers along. That means driving Alyssa to her job at the mall.
The only time I let her take the bus home is if she works early morning, early hours. But anything after 9:30, 10 o'clock, no, I'll go get her.
After she'll head home, try to get Takaria to crack her school books, despite it all.
We learn those values as kids, we learn those things in school, and we are still struggling to achieve our goals of equality. But the period of Reconstruction after the end of slavery shows that we were able to reckon with what we had gotten wrong. And the civil rights movement that happened a century later, where we passed laws attempting to guarantee equal access to the ballot, equal opportunity, is another moment where we looked at what was happening in our country and got horrified, and as a society, in our democracy, we made changes.
Roxanne and Mimuna could have taken the low score in their test as a setback, but they've taken it in stride.
I found out about the results when I got my high school acceptance letter. It told me my high school. I got into Hero High School, which is in Southern Boulevard.
It's a medical surrounded school. They have a program there called Montefiore. They work with Montefiore Hospital for students that want to join the medicine area. I picked that school because they said that their program is very great.
And best of all, she says, Roxanne got in as well. The two will be pre-meds together.
Maimuna and I will be going together for 4 more years, and Hero High School gives you your first 2 years of college there, which is also a great advantage because, for example, if we both get into the colleges that we would like, we could spend those first 2 years together, and then we could travel to the colleges that we would like, and like that we could at least have 6 years together.
We had a orientation just maybe 2 weeks ago, and they said that if you come to our school, that you can work with Montefiore very early and you can start your medical career very early. They'll also give you 2 years of college so that you can get a degree very easily before you go on to actual college.
That sounds like a great school. Were you disappointed that you didn't get into specialized school?
No, not really, because I wasn't really thinking about the specialized high schools that much. I just tried it just to try it.
Hero High in the Bronx is one of the city's innovative P-Tech schools. At Hero, students graduate as registered nurses or healthcare workers with the option to go on to a 4-year college, even medical school.
I was born and raised in the South Bronx, literally as it was burning. Right now, I think the whole structural inequalities of even just people thinking that our communities can't really learn the way other communities can is just, that's where we have to start. We have to start well before. So even if we did knock down the whole educational system, we'd still have to go back and retrain people who are going to be responsible for teaching our children, that all of us are capable of learning and doing it in a way that's culturally and I think even ethically supportive of seeing us all as humans, and not as that there are some of us who are just born to excel and others who are just problems to be solved.
Growing up, she says, the Bronx had its problems, but the media exaggerated them, creating a vicious cycle of fear and neglect. Carter's made a name for herself traveling the world as a speaker and an activist for neighborhood transformation. But she's come back to the Bronx to stay.
I'm sure that there were definitely issues around violence in the neighborhood, but for the most part, I never felt unsafe.
Carter remembers how hard it was at Bronx Science, not seeing herself reflected anywhere.
My teachers here were mostly white. So to go to Bronx Science, to come up from here to take the 4 train was a really kind of crazy experience, to go to a place that was predominantly white, I can't say it seemed hostile, but I understood why most of the black kids and Latino kids kind of sat together, because it wasn't welcoming in any real way.
Jaheim sees volleyball as a way out and hopes to graduate with no incidents. Despite the early setback, Jaylin was accepted at Boston University.
Congratulations. On behalf of the Board of Admissions, I'm excited to welcome you to Boston University, class of 2025. They sent an email early in the morning, and so I woke up and I checked my email and I was like, oh my gosh.
Jean Mesereau hopes his art can inspire people from different backgrounds to be more inclusive. And Maymuna and Roxanne, buoyed by their acceptance into Hero, the pre-med high school, carry on with their studies and with just being kids.
One thing I would like to say is that sometimes there are a lot of people that try to bring you down when you have a goal for something. Do not let them take the power that you have in believing that you're able to achieve something. If you have something that you want to do, try your best to do it, and just don't let those people with negative thoughts brainwash you. Just go for it. And then if you do not get into it, just try your best and just learn from your mistakes.
For more on this episode, go to america.cgtn.com/big story.